Hi, my name is Danny, and I am the founder of Parleya. Parleya is a new social media platform that incentivizes healthy conversation about traditionally controversial or polarizing topics. And today I would love to give you all a quick demonstration about how Parleya works. So, in this demonstration, I'm first going to show you how a conversation works, and then I'm going to discuss why the format of these conversations actually incentivizes healthy conversation, and then finally, I'm just going to give you a very quick tour of the various screens that you'll encounter on this app. So, on other social media platforms, you might post pictures or you might post life updates. The actual entity that you're posting on Parleya is a conversation. So this on this initial screen here, you'll see basically a feed of different conversations that other users have posted. And the easiest way for you all to get an understanding of how a conversation on Parleya works is for me to just create a new one. So I will click this green button at the bottom, and this opens a prompt to create a conversation. So, right now in America, after the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests, the topic of racial injustice has been at the forefront of the American attention. But at the same time, I have spoken to a lot of people, and I know for a fact that a lot of people do not feel particularly comfortable sharing their particular perspectives about this topic just because it is very controversial and very painful for a lot of people. And so, in this particular conversation, I would like to give you a demonstration about how you might be able to have a healthy conversation about an issue with racial injustice on Parleya that you might not feel comfortable approaching in person. So, for this conversation, just for the sake of example, let's assume that I am a person who hasn't ever really felt like I've been victimized by racial injustice, and also my entire life I've really only lived in areas where the effects of racial injustice aren't clear. And in particular, I really don't understand why defunding the police would be a good idea. And so I'm very interested in hearing other people's perspective and hearing why defunding the police is a good idea. And so let's also say that I come from a more conservative background, and it is kind of my assumption that people who are more liberal would be more in favor of defunding the police. And so let's say I want to hear from liberals on this topic. So for intended audience here, I will say liberals. For the conversation topic, I will say, how is defunding the police a good idea? And then for my first message, I will say, I understand that racial injustice is a major problem in America, but I don't understand how defunding the police is a good idea. Who would enforce our laws? Okay. So now I'm going to post this onto Parleya, and you'll see that this conversation topic appears at the top of the conversation feed. So I have Parleya opened up on two other phones, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this conversation. And the first thing that you'll notice about this conversation is that it almost looks like a mixture between a Reddit thread and a text conversation. So you'll see the intended audience at the top, the conversation topic at the top, but the first message almost looks like a text message. And so I'm now going to respond from two other phones. And so my first message here, I've copied and pasted this just so it'll be quicker. The first message I'll post is there, and then the second message I'll post is here. Okay, and then as you can see, the different responses that different users will make to your initial message don't really look like individual text messages. They kind of appear like part of a larger message. And the reason for this is that these are actually referred to as response candidates. And what happens is that a lot of users can post response candidates to your initial message, and then what happens after that is that other users can come in and essentially upvote the response candidate they think is the best response to your initial message, and then the response candidate with the most upvotes is taken to be the official response. And so here we can see that the response that says essentially the police budget is huge in LA, the police budget is about $3 billion. out of 10 million arrests each year, only 5% of those arrests are for offenses that threaten public safety. Defunding the police will take the focus away from arrests for minor crimes that disproportionately affect black people, and will keep the focus on major crimes that threaten society. So that particular response has received more upvotes, and so if I click this, you can see that this response is the current official response of the internet. And so then this would be the response that the original message poster would post to. And so at this point, I will act once again as the original message poster, and I will post a response to this. And so, okay, I will say, I think I understand more about this now. At the same time, how will the police function without their budget? So I will post this and confirm that. And so now at this point, and this is just kind of the logistics of how a conversation works, this block of response candidates is actually fixed. And so users can no longer append to that response block, and that's really to keep conversations from being confusing to other users, and keep the official responses fixed after the original conversation poster has posted that conversation. And so now what I'm going to do, and the thing that you might be wondering, is what happens if someone comes in and posts something that's unhelpful or makes an attack against the original message poster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now write another response from one of my phones. I'm going to say, you are clearly racist and don't appreciate this issue. Educate yourself. Okay, and I'm going to post this. And while it certainly may be true that it would potentially be in this user's best interest to educate themselves, this response is making essentially a personal attack on the original message poster. And so what you'll see here is that there's a fairly prominent block button next to this first message. And what I'll do is I will click on this block button, and Parleya essentially gives you 3 different reasons for blocking a message. 1, the response is making an unnecessary personal emotional attack. 2, the response was written by someone who clearly isn't the intended audience, and that is to protect against echo chamber effects or something along those lines. And then the third response is, or the third reason is essentially the response just is off topic. It doesn't address the message. So the first reason here is most appropriate. So I'll click that and submit. And what happens at this point is that the conversation is actually terminated. And this isn't actually a huge deal, because the user can go back and essentially kind of repost another conversation that addresses this topic and kind of continue the conversation in that way. And also, because these conversations are anonymous, users can't go in and see all of the conversations a particular user has posted. And so there's kind of nothing that traces back to the various conversations you've posted, aside from you being able to see your conversations. So now, this is essentially how a conversation works. And I should also mention that if you're able to have 3 successful back and forths between the original message poster and the internet and these response blocks, if there are 3 of those, then that counts as a successful conversation. So now that I've kind of described how a conversation works, I would like to talk about how this actually incentivizes healthy conversations. And to do that, I would like to direct your attention towards these 3 numbers that you'll see at the top of every conversation and at the top of every conversation message. And I will open up the little information tab. The first number is the number of times that this user has had a message blocked or has been unfriended. The second number is the number of times the user has blocked someone else's message or has unfriended another user. And the third number is the number of successful conversations of which this user has been a part. And so what these numbers immediately show you is essentially how good a person is at having good conversations. So if the first number is very high, what that indicates is that maybe this user is aggressive, but in general, there's something that this user is doing that their messages are not being taken well. So the real life analogy is if you walk up to someone and you engage in conversation and they start yelling at you immediately, you probably wouldn't want to continue having a conversation with that person. Likewise, if the second number is high, what that indicates is that they're blocking a bunch of people's messages. And if that number is disproportionately high, maybe that indicates that they are generally unable to engage with other opinions that they don't agree with, and so they're blocking way too many messages. And so the real life analogy there is if you go up to a person and you engage in a conversation and they immediately become very, very offended and they walk away every single time that you try to engage in some difficult conversation with them. again, that's probably not the sort of person that you would want to interact with. And then finally, the last number is the easiest to understand. If the last number is high, that essentially indicates that a person is very good at having conversations. And so this is someone who will probably be able to cope with a wide variety of different opinions and be able to kind of come up with their own viewpoint that is helpful to a lot of other people. And so the reason this incentivizes healthy conversations is that the basic premise here is that people want to interact with other people on the internet. And the internet, even for internet trolls, the internet isn't interesting unless there's someone to interact with. And so essentially, if you have high first or second numbers, then you're essentially a person who many people probably won't want to interact with. And so the incentive there is to keep your first two numbers low. And so what that means in turn is that even though you may feel very aggressively towards a person in a conversation, there is a fear that you will be blocked and then that will show up in your three numbers. And so what you'll want to do is maybe censor your response a little bit or make it kind of more palatable to the other user so that you're still making your points, but without being as aggressive. And the difference between this and other main social media platforms, so let's say like Facebook or Twitter, is that when you tweet something or you post in a comment section on Facebook, there's really nothing in the back of your head that's telling you to not be mean, essentially. Unless you say something that's like very, very hateful or like very racist, there's a high probability that your message won't be taken down. But on this platform, on the other hand, there is kind of the thing that's in the back of your mind that's telling you to try to be a little bit more gentle with your responses. And so what that does is it creates an environment where people want to post healthy conversations, and they want to have these healthy conversations. And so yes, and so this is the main reason why Parleya conversations actually incentivize healthy conversation that is productive. Now, the last little bit of functionality that I'd like to tell you about with regards to Parleya is this final thing. And so you'll notice, as I said earlier, if you have 3 successful back and forths between the original user and the internet, that is counted as a successful conversation, and that would mean that the last number of the appropriate parties would be upticked. And you'll see here that after a successful conversation, there is an option to friend another user. So obviously this is a very basic conversation with really no substance. But let's say that I, as the original message poster, find this first message to be particularly useful or helpful. So what I'll do is I will send a friend request to that user, and then I have that user up on one of my phones. So I'll accept that friend request. And then at that point, what I can now do is actually have a more informal chat conversation with that particular user. So this is basically just a chat conversation, so I'll just post a very quick message here. But what this allows you to do is kind of to connect more with individuals and hear more about individuals and their perspectives, maybe their background, how they came to have the opinion that they post in the conversation. So whereas the original conversations that I was discussing, those are anonymous, and the reason for their anonymity is to keep the focus on the topics at hand. In this part of the app, the focus is trying to connect users with other people from different backgrounds and opinions in a kind of a healthier way than is typically happening right now on the internet. And so, yeah, so those are kind of the basic functionalities of Parleya. And then finally, I would just like to give you a quick run through of all the different screens that you'll encounter. So obviously this first one is the conversation feed, and I already showed you what a conversation looks like. On this next little bubble, you can see the conversations you started, the conversations you've joined, and this user hasn't actually joined any conversations, which is why this is empty. And then finally, your chat conversations with other individual users. And you'll see a lot of Daniel unfriended Danny just because I've given this demonstration a lot. And anyway. So, and then the final page here is your profile. The profile is very basic. It includes your first name, last name, your 3 numbers, a 1 to 2 sentence bio, and then you can see your friends. So Daniel G. And just to keep some level of anonymity, because when you're talking about controversial topics, you really don't want people to feel like they're exposing themselves to the internet, especially when they're kind of saying things that maybe are a bit more controversial. You're only actually able to see the first initial of the user's last name. But so this is essentially kind of what a profile would look like if you're viewing someone else's profile on Parleya. So again, first name, last name, 3 numbers, and the 1 to 2 sentence bio. Yeah, and so that is essentially Parleya. That's how Parleya works. And I really hope you enjoy using this platform. Thank you very much.